So let's look at line and Rhino. Sometimes drawing line in Rhino can be more difficult than drawing lines in Illustrator, but we'll have a look at it, and if you get a bit of practice with it, you'll find it's similar and maybe not as intuitive. But keep in mind, there is also a method where you can draw line art in Illustrator and import it into Rhino. So if you find that drawing line in Rhino is too difficult, then that might be an option. It's totally fine to do it that way. I have the Curve Tools panel open along here. And then what that does is it gives me all the line drawing tools on my left side here. So a single line in Rhino is pretty simple. You just click there and you have a line. I mean, you know, pretty basic. One thing that is going to help you a lot when you're drawing lines, personally, I like to always snap to grid or use an O-snap. So I'm going to do this demo. I have the O-snap turned on, and the checkbox I have is end, because when you draw multiple lines, you have to be able to connect the ends together to make them into a closed shape. So I'm going to zoom in here a bit. I'm drawing in the top view. So we looked at a single line. Usually you're not drawing a single line as geometry. You're usually using single lines just for construction lines, and we'll talk about that at some point. So the next one, after the single line, the next one would be a polyline. Okay, and the polyline will draw multiple lines, segments, and it'll just put them together. And you can see I've got grid snap turned on so that I'm getting very kind of, you know, I can draw squares. I can just, personally, I like to count grid lines over when I'm doing curves, because then I can measure things on the fly. And if I have to make another one, you know, it makes it really easy, because I've just gone over one square, up one square, over three squares. It becomes more like a game, like a useful kind of design game. So you end up with these rectilinear kind of lines. Now, if you want to draw curved lines, the one that is the one that you're really going to want to use is control point curves. And now we're getting into Bezier curves and control points. And this is where drawing, whether it's in 2D in Illustrator or in Rhino, it starts to get a bit tricky. So if I click there, and I'm going to go up one square, and now I'm going over two squares, then I click. And you notice now that I'm moving along that horizontal axis, my curve is changing. So if I don't want it to change, I would click here and then hit enter. So now I've created that curve. But what if I want to keep drawing that shape? I can continue. But now I've got my end point turned on with the O-snaps, and that's where it becomes really handy, because now I'm getting feedback on the tooltip. I know that my next line is going to connect with the previous line I drew, and it makes it like really smooth, really sweet, so that I can, if I want, I can draw symmetrical lines at this point, just by counting over these different squares. So now I've made 3 lines, and if I wanted to connect them into one line, I can do that. And the way that I would do that is the join tool. So the join tool, it works for surfaces and curves, and in this case, we're going to click on it, and then we're going to select the curves that we want to join together and hit enter, and now they're one curve. Okay, so that's not making a shape. That was just a symmetrical curved line. So if I want to make a continuous shape, I can use the same method, control point curves. And if I do it very freehand and go along kind of snap, I'm not really too concerned about what I'm going to end up designing. I'm just doing it as a demo. So now I've got one closed curve. And what I can do with that, of course, is extrude it, because we looked at that in the last one. The last video, we looked at extrusion. So for demo, I'm going to copy it. I'm just going to do Control C, Control V. And when you do that, you've probably noticed by now that you can have multiple objects basically in the same space, and you can't see multiple objects, but there's multiple objects there. Okay, and if you remember from the last video, we have the surface tools. Planar curves is it's really the tool you use an awful lot when you're making any geometry that you're drawing from lines. Okay, so you can see in the perspective view, we've got a surface and we have a curve now. So that's important to remember, right? Because, sorry, I think I put the tool. Okay, and so now we're going to extrude it. Extrude. Okay, we can extrude the curve straight, but we can also extrude this as a solid. So on the top menu, we go to extrude planar curve. So in the command line, it's asking me select the curves to extrude. And I'm going to click the surface and then press enter when done. And because I selected the surface, now we have a solid. If I wanted to extrude it as not as a solid, but as a surface, I could do that as well. All I would need to do is extrude the curve straight. Now, the other thing with these tools that you can do is if you want to be more accurate, you can select it, hit enter, and then go up to the toolbar and then type in the number that you want for the height. So I typed in 25 pixels and it gave me that. So this one is we're extruding the curves, and that one we extruded the surface. So this one would be a solid object and this one is an open shape.